They sold you natural, but what if the glow was carefully engineered all along? What if the woman who built an image around simplicity was quietly reshaping every detail behind the scenes and nobody noticed until the clues started lining up one by one? Because when you look closely at Meghan Markle, something doesn't quite add up. The story feels too polished, too controlled, too perfect.
Meghan is a huge fan of, natural ingredients. She stays hydrated. She spoke to us about her love of coconut oil, both, on her skin and her hair. She also cooks with it. And this really contributes to this kind of natural glow that we all see.
She has always spoken about nature, clean living, authenticity, a lifestyle that feels effortless, almost untouched. But whispers began creeping in, quiet at first, then louder. People started comparing photos, old interviews, red carpet appearances, and suddenly the natural narrative began to crack, not loudly, but subtly, like a glass fracture you only notice when the light hits it just right.
And you believe it is true that Meghan Markle has gone under the knife?
Oh, yes. Of course she has. She's never actually said I have, but you can see because certain things have changed quite significantly.
Because here's where it gets interesting. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It never does. It was gradual, strategic, almost invisible unless you're looking for it. And once you start looking, you can't unsee it. The hair was the first clue. Not surgical, not invasive, but powerful. As a teenager, she had those soft, voluminous curls. Youthful, effortless. But then they disappeared, replaced by sleek, straight strands that reframed her entire face. Suddenly, she didn't just look pretty, she looked camera-ready, intentional, controlled. And that shift, it wasn't random, it was calculated. Then came the smile. And this is where things start getting a little too perfect, because once upon a time, there was a gap, a small one, unique, memorable, the kind of detail that gives a face character. And then, gone, just like that. Replaced by symmetry so precise, it almost feels designed. Was it natural? Maybe. But in an industry obsessed with perfection, coincidence feels like a weak explanation. Bonding, veneers, whatever it was, the result was undeniable. A polished, glowing smile that fits seamlessly into the image she was building. But here's the twist. People didn't just stop at the smile. They started noticing something else, something more controversial. During her time on television, especially in those early high glamour appearances, her figure sparked quiet conversations. Styling, push-up bras, or something more permanent? The speculation grew louder when her look seemed to shift again later. Fuller at one point, then softer, more natural later on. It didn't scream change, it whispered it. And sometimes whispers are more powerful than shouts. And that's the pattern. Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just small, precise adjustments that slowly rewrote the narrative of her appearance. Step by step, detail by detail. Almost like someone was editing a picture, but in real life. Then comes the deeper layer. The part people argue about the most, because when you compare earlier images to later ones, the face itself begins to tell a story. The structure looks sharper, more refined, as if the angles have been gently corrected, not dramatically altered, just enough to create that flawless balance cameras love. And suddenly, the question changes. It's no longer did something change, it becomes how much changed. Because once you start connecting these dots, a bigger picture begins to form, a pattern of subtle upgrades, enhancements that don't scream for attention but quietly demand admiration. And that's what makes it so fascinating and so unsettling. The contrast between the message and the reality, the brand versus the possibility behind it. She promotes natural living, natural beauty, natural everything. But what if natural was never the full story? What if it was just the part you were meant to see? And maybe that's why this conversation refuses to die. Because it's not really about beauty, it's about perception, about trust, about the gap between what's shown and what's hidden. Because the more you look, the more questions appear. And the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to believe it was all just coincidence. And just when you think you figured it out, that's when the most controversial details start surfacing. The ones people argue about in hushed tones and comment sections that never sleep. Because the face, yes, the face itself, becomes the center of the mystery. Look closely, not casually, but carefully, like you're searching for something that doesn't want to be found. And you'll notice it. The nose. It's subtle, almost too subtle to call out with certainty, but the difference is there. The bridge appears narrower, more refined, The tip slightly lifted, sculpted in a way that feels deliberate. Not drastic, never obvious, but precise. And precision is rarely accidental. It's the kind of change that doesn't scream procedure, it whispers perfection. And in Hollywood, perfection almost always has a story behind it. But that's not where it ends, because once the structure of the face shifts, everything else begins to fall into place around it, like pieces of a puzzle you didn't even realize you were solving. The cheeks, for example. Earlier, they carried a softness, a natural fullness that gave her a youthful glow. But over time, that softness seemed to fade, replaced by a sharper, more sculpted contour. Now here's where it gets interesting, because that kind of change doesn't just happen randomly. Some say it's weight loss. Others point to something more intentional, something like buccal fat removal, a procedure designed to carve out definition where there once was softness. And if that's true, then what you're seeing isn't just aging, it's design. But then comes the contradiction, because as the face becomes more sculpted, more defined, there are moments where it suddenly looks fuller again, slightly plumper, more lifted. And that's where another layer of speculation enters the picture. Fillers. Temporary, adjustable, almost like fine-tuning a living canvas. One appearance looks sharper, the next looks softer, and people start asking, why the variation? Why the constant shift? Because natural aging doesn't move like that. It doesn't reverse and reappear. But enhancements? They do, quietly, repeatedly, and always just enough to stay believable. And then there are the lips. Not dramatically different, not in a way that demands attention, but enough to raise eyebrows, literally and figuratively. At times, they appear fuller, more defined, with a slightly lifted shape that changes the entire balance of the face. It's not extreme, it's not exaggerated, it's control. Almost like someone knew exactly how far to go without crossing the line into obvious. And that's the theme here, isn't it? Not transformation, but refinement. Not reinvention, but enhancement. Just enough to elevate, never enough to expose. But what really fuels the conversation, what keeps people watching and rewatching, comparing and questioning, is the skin. Because there are moments where it looks impossibly smooth, almost too smooth. Expressions seem slightly restrained, like the face is choosing what to reveal and what to hold back. And that's where another familiar word enters the discussion. Botox. A staple in Hollywood, subtle when done carefully, invisible unless you know what to look for. And if it's there, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, maintaining the illusion of time standing still. Even the eyebrows tell a story. Once thinner, shaped by early trends, they've evolved into fuller, more structured arches that frame the eyes in a completely different way. Whether it's styling, treatment, or something more advanced, the effect is undeniable. The eyes appear more open, more lifted, more intentional, and suddenly the entire face feels more awake, more curated. And then there's the jawline and chin, the most debated part of all. Some say it's contouring, clever makeup tricks playing with light and shadow. Others insist the difference is too consistent, too defined to be just cosmetics. The chin appears broader, the jaw sharper, the profile more commanding. But here's the thing, this is where certainty fades and speculation takes over. Because unlike everything else, this change doesn't come with clear answers. It lingers in that gray area where opinions clash and no one can quite prove anything. And maybe that's exactly why this entire story is so compelling, because it lives in that space between what is known and what is suspected. Nothing is confirmed, nothing is admitted, and yet the visual evidence keeps people talking, keeps them questioning, keeps them coming back to compare one image to another, one era to the next. But here's the real tension, the part that refuses to settle. It's not about whether these changes happened or not, it's about the narrative built around them, the insistence on natural, the repeated emphasis on simplicity, authenticity, purity. Because when that message becomes so strong, so central to a personal brand, any hint of contradiction feels amplified. It doesn't just become a detail, it becomes a conflict. And that's where the audience starts to feel something deeper than curiosity, doubt. Not loud, not aggressive, but persistent. Because if everything is natural, why do the changes feel so precise, so calculated, so perfectly aligned with industry standards? Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe it really is just lighting, angles, aging, styling, evolution. Or maybe it's something more, something carefully managed, carefully maintained, carefully hidden in plain sight. Because in the end, the biggest mystery isn't what changed. It's how seamlessly it all fits together. How every adjustment, every refinement, every tiny shift contributes to a version of perfection that feels almost too consistent to be accidental. And the most unsettling part, the story still isn't finished. The images keep coming. The appearances keep evolving. And with each new moment, the question quietly returns, sharper than before. What are we really looking at, and what are we not being told?